Hi. Note that this video is going to be on the long side. I have several points to make, but I promise you that if you stick with it to the end, it will all make sense. I'm a lot of things, but for the purpose of this video, the most important one that you need to know is that I'm a Jew. My parents were Jewish. I went to Hebrew school. As a kid, I went to the YMHA, the Young Men's Hebrew Association, to play. I had a bar mitzvah, etc. I remember as a child trying to understand the Holocaust when millions of people like me were murdered, not for anything they did, but simply because they existed. It wasn't something they spent much time on at either public school or Hebrew school, but I do remember thinking, well, at least the Nazis were defeated, and something like that can never ever happen again. Keep that in mind, as I'll return to that later. I've never made one of these videos before, and if things were different, I would not be doing so now. There are so many other things I would prefer to be doing. Plucking weeds out of my yard at midnight would be preferable. But the comments by Kanye West and the ensuing controversy compel me to do this. I've waited some time since he made them in the hope that things would settle down, but things haven't done so. Consider some of the things that happened after he said what he did. On November 3rd, the FBI in Newark tweeted it had received, quote, credible information of a broad threat to synagogues, unquote, in New Jersey, the state where I grew up. 4 days ago, 39 headstones at a Jewish cemetery in suburban Chicago were vandalized with hate messages, including 16 swastikas and at least covered in the misspelling message, quote, Kanye was right, unquote. 2 days ago, a pair of arrests in New York City's Penn Station prevented a developing threat to the Jewish community. But, before going any further, some family history. This is my maternal grandfather that was taken before World War I. He served in the U.S. Army during that war. He was injured. Subsequently, he went back to Europe, to Germany, in fact, for an operation to try and cure him. It didn't work. Subsequently, he was in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. He died long before I was born. This is a picture of my father. He graduated at the top of his class in college in New York City, either at CCNY or City University of New York. He then went on to Harvard Law School, which he graduated from. That was not all that long after Harvard first started admitting Jews, and my dad was born in 1917. When World War II came around, he enlisted. He served in the U.S. Army in the Pacific Theater. When he got out, he did what everybody else did. He got married, raised a family. He had bought a business from a relative selling vacuum tubes. Unfortunately, the history of integrated electronics meant transistors, so that was eventually going to go bust, which happened in my late teens. He subsequently had a series of not very well paying day jobs. He finally got into the civil service before he died. With regard to those day jobs, some of them included, or at least one of them included, delivering papers early in the morning, like at 3 a.m. on Sundays, delivering the New York Times, New York Daily News, New Brunswick Home News. And this is a picture of my uncle, or that was my uncle. He died some years ago. He served as a navigator on B-29 Liberator bombers. He overflew Hiroshima just a few days after they dropped the nuclear bomb there. And this is me. About 50 years ago, I enlisted when I was almost 17 and a half. I served 4 years active duty on 2 ships. My first ship was part of the Mayaguez campaign off Cambodia at the end of the Vietnam War, and for those of you who remember your military history, that was a contribution by Jerry Ford and Henry Kissinger to notable military fuck-ups. It was on my first ship that I encountered in my first 100% authentic, genuine Jew hater. A superior petty officer told me one day that there were three types of people he didn't like: niggers, spics, and kikes. Guess which group I was a part of. By the way, if I had $1 for every time a crewmate felt the need to come tell me, "Hey, did you know Jesus was a Jew?" I'd have more money than Donald Trump. Okay, admittedly, it's not the most difficult thing to achieve, but still. Moving on. Have you ever heard of Friedrich Wilhelm Adolf Marr? He was born November 16, 1819, died July 17, 1904. Of course not, but he was a German agitator and journalist who popularized the term anti-Semitism. Marr rejected the idea of assimilation as a means for Jews to become Germans. In a pamphlet published in 1879, he introduced the idea that Germans and Jews were locked in a long-standing conflict, the origins of which he attributed to race, and that the Jews were winning. He argued that Jewish emancipation resulting from German liberalism had allowed the Jews to control German finance and industry. Does that remind you of anyone currently? Furthermore, since this conflict was based on different qualities of German and Jewish races, it could not be resolved even by the total assimilation of the Jewish population. According to him, the struggle between Jews and Germans would only be resolved by the victory of one and the ultimate death of the other. A Jewish victory, he concluded, would result in the end of the German people. To prevent this from happening, in 1879, Marr founded the Anti-Semitism Liga, League of Anti-Semites, the first German organization committed specifically to combating the alleged threat to Germany posed by the Jews and advocating their forced removal from the country. Now, before he died, Marr recanted what he said and did, but by then it was too late. There is a straight line from his thinking to the Holocaust. Now, it has long struck me as strange that Jews should use the word coined by a Jew hater to describe the type of people who hate Jews. After all, it's not like Jews weren't hated and being persecuted by non-Jews before the late 19th century. Furthermore, and more importantly, Semite is a name given in the 19th century to a member of any people who spoke one of the Semitic languages, a family of languages spoken primarily in parts of Western Asia and Africa. The term therefore came to include Arabs, Akkadians, Canaanites, Hebrews, some Ethiopians, and Aramaean tribes. So if we're really concerned about anti-Semitism, we would be concerned when Arabs are being persecuted or killed, but we aren't. So why not call it what it is, as in Jew hating? We should take a clue from the British writer George Orwell, who wrote in his famous essay, Politics in the English Language, that the English language, he said, quote, becomes slovenly and inaccurate because our thoughts are foolish, but the slovenliness of our language makes it easier for us to have foolish thoughts. Besides, when I had my bar mitzvah, after reading the Haftorah section, Rabbi didn't say, Mazel Tov, you are now an adult Semite. He said, you are now a Jewish man. Moving on. Kanye West. When Kanye West said he was going to go DEFCON free on Jewish people, as everybody knows, all hell, at least rhetorically, broke loose. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it because so much has been said that I'm not sure I can contribute much other than to make this one point, which nobody else has pointed out thus far, and that is, Kanye, you seem somewhat mathematically challenged. By that I mean the defense readiness condition, DEFCON as you put it, is actually a system referring to an alert state used by the United States Armed Forces. DEFCON 3 is just an increase in force readiness that is required for normal readiness. It's actually DEFCON 1, where war is imminent, has already begun. So Kanye, you are 2 levels short. Now, it's not for me to advise you, but perhaps a remedial course in basic arithmetic would be in order for you. Now, I've read that some people think the subsequent denunciation of West by Jews and non-Jews was too much and that he was just exercising his right to free expression under the First Amendment. And actually, I'm somewhat sympathetic to that because, as anti-Jewish sentiment goes, there's been far worse. Let's review. Reverend Jesse Jackson referred to Jews as, quote, Hymies, unquote, in New York City as, quote, Hymietown, unquote, in January 1984 during a conversation with a black Washington Post reporter. A storm of protest erupted, and Jackson at first denied the remarks, then accused Jews of conspiring to defeat him. The Nation of Islam's Louis Farrakhan threatened the reporter in a radio broadcast and issued a public warning to Jews made in Jackson's presence, quote, if you harm this brother, meaning Jackson, it will be the last one you harm, unquote. Finally, Jackson doused the fires in late February 1985 with a speech admitting guilt and seeking atonement before national Jewish leaders in a New Hampshire synagogue. Yet, Jackson refused to denounce Farrakhan, and lingering, deeply rooted suspicions have led to an enduring split between Jackson and many, if not all, Jews. It should be said, however, that Jackson did do some useful things in later years, such as rescuing American hostages being held by various dictatorships, so he gets a pass. Louis Farrakhan. On October 8th, 1985, he spoke at Madison Square Garden. Among other remarks, quote, the Jewish lobby has a stranglehold on the government, unquote. Quote, whenever the Jews want, they get it, and the president himself is punking out to the Jewish lobby. He also said, quote, the germ of murder is sown in the hearts of Jews across this nation. Quote, why didn't they compare me with Jesus? Jesus was hated by the Jews. Farrakhan is hated by the Jews. Why do they hate Jesus for? Or what do they hate Jesus for? Because he exposed their wickedness and sin, unquote. Now, I confess I have a special interest in Farrakhan because on the night of that speech, I was there at Madison Square Garden. I was sitting in the press section. I was covering it for a long-defunct New York alternative news weekly called The Guardian. And when it came to the point in his speech, when he made the reference to, quote, hook-nosed Jews, unquote, I wasn't surprised or shocked. I was expecting it, and he said it, and when he did say it, it was just another thing on the checklist of things that I was writing down for the article I intended to write. But what happened next bothered me. It still bothered me, because after he made the remark, I saw hundreds, maybe it was thousands of people sitting in their chairs on the court, on the floor, and in the bleachers, rising up, cheering, applauding, saying things like, tell it, brother, amen, go tell it, you speak the truth, right on, man, etc. Now, if you know a little history, that's basic incitement of a mob, right out of Kristallnacht. It's the kind of thing that sent a shiver down my spine and should send a shiver down anybody's spine. But, moving on. Al Sharpton. On December 8, 1995, 8 people, including the assailant, were killed when a gunman seized hostages at Freddy's Fashion Mart in Harlem, New York City, and set the building on fire. In 1995, a black Pentecostal church, which owned a retail property across from the Apollo Theater, asked Fred Harari, a Jewish tenant who operated Freddy's Fashion Mart, to evict his longtime subtenant, a record store called The Record Shack, owned by black South African Sikulu Shanje. Al Sharpton led protests outside the store over several weeks against both the planned eviction of the Record Shack and because Freddy's did not employ any black workers. Sharpton told the crowd of protesters, quote, we will not stand by and allow them to move this brother so that some white interloper can expand his business. On December 8, 1995, Roland James Smith Jr., who may have attended previous protests outside the store, entered the store with a revolver and a container of flammable liquid. He ordered customers to leave, then set the store on fire, sprinkling around the accelerant and positioning himself near the only exit. Smith shot at 2 police officers arriving at the scene and shot 4 customers as they were escaping the fire. It was 2 hours before firefighters could enter the burned-out building to discover 7 store employees had died of smoke inhalation and the gunman had fatally shot himself. Now, Al Sharpton has never acknowledged his role in that massacre, nor has he ever apologized, even though his actions and speeches were caught on tape. Now, I did not go through that brief history because I think black people have some enduring hatred of Jews. In fact, any reasonably dispassionate examination of the historical record shows that to date, white Jew haters have committed far more atrocities than black Jew haters have ever dreamed of. And when it comes to Jew hating, white people are in a league all of their own. But, moving on. Let me talk about two women who are no longer with us. In 1995, William David Jones beat, stabbed, and raped his 20-year-old friend, Amy Susan Kenner, to death in the basement of the house he shared with his mother. She had recently graduated nursing school. Authorities said he used a baseball bat, a pitchfork, and a handsaw on her. Authorities said he and Kenner had a long-standing platonic relationship, but that Jones snapped after she resisted his romantic overtures. At trial, it was revealed that Jones had done a lot of writing, 554 pages in all. It included a novel about a man's sexual dysfunction and his obsession with red-headed Jewish women. In that story, titled The King of the Ranch, a serial killer rapes, murders, and decapitates his victim with garden hedge clippers. The fictional character then carries the body away in a plastic garbage bag. Authorities say that after Kenner was sexually assaulted and killed, Jones tried to decapitate her body with a handsaw. He placed a plastic bag over her head. Kenner was a red-headed Jewish woman. Jones is still in prison. On May 21st, 1996, 44-year-old Phyllis Starr was found dead, stabbed to death, in her apartment on the 14th floor of the Times Square Hotel in New York City. On March 11, 1998, the jury found her killer, Mark Kohler, guilty of second degree of murder. He was released from prison last year. Now, I mention these women because they were both relatives of mine. The first one I never knew, but she was the granddaughter of a cousin of mine. She used to give us hand-me-down clothes that my brother and I wore. The second one was a first cousin. I had met her a few times over the years. The last time probably less than a decade before she was murdered. Now, Jones was black and Kohler was white, but they were both Christian. One more thing. I have an elderly relative who is now 97, soon to be 98. She lives in a rural area, meaning primarily white and primarily Christian. I visited her in September. She told me she no longer feels safe publicly displaying signs of her Jewish faith, so she no longer keeps a menorah in her window during Hanukkah. And that brings me to my main point. Doesn't really matter whether you're black or white, but it seems that, once again, Christians, black Christians, white Christians, are acting out. By acting out, I mean indulging in Jew hating. Some Christians are saying crap like, Jews will not replace us. Now, how the hell are we going to do that when we may, at best, only total 7.5 million Jews in America? We are only, if that much, 0.2%, I repeat, 0.2% of a global population. Now, I know most Christians are like most Jews. You're just trying to go about your business and get through the day. But here in America, Christians, you are the majority. I say again, you are the majority. We are not. And while I understand that it's only a small fraction of you who are haters, history has taught Jews that it only takes the action of a few to bring about really, really bad results. So, you are the ones indulging in batshit crazy conspiracy theories toward a minority in this country. We are not. Now, I used to think it was something in that holy water you drink. By the way, I assume it must be way, way more potent than Manischewitz. But, alas, if only it were that simple. I don't really give a flying fuck why you believe what you believe, or why you do when it comes, or why you do what you do when it comes to stigmatizing, insulting, attacking, beating, and killing Jews. What I am telling you is that you need to stop this shit, and you need to stop it now. Now, having said all that, I am in no way saying that Jews are somehow better than Christians. Just like you, we have our share of fuck-ups and criminals. Bernie Madoff, Jeffrey Epstein, Harvey Weinstein, to name a few. The point is that we are not a secretive cabal. We're your countrymen and countrywomen. We're your neighbors, friends, co-workers, and colleagues. We serve and defend the country just like members of your families do. We contribute to society just like you do. So how about giving us the same respect you would give any other member of the society? Keep in mind that it was Thomas Jefferson who wrote, "The measure of society is how it treats its weakest members." So, how about showing you're civilized? Oh, and remember that remark I made in the beginning about thinking as a child the Holocaust could never happen again, let alone in a country like America? I stopped believing that a long time ago. Okay, that's it. I appreciate your patience. Thanks for watching. I hope you'll think about this at least for a little while. Take care. Goodbye.